The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Pentagon briefing room as Admiral Robert Hayes shuffled through his papers one final time. At 62, he had seen enough military ceremonies to last several lifetimes, but today's Medal of Honor presentation felt different somehow. The recipient was someone he should know, someone whose file had crossed his desk multiple times, yet her name escaped him completely. Sarah Chen, he muttered under his breath, practicing the pronunciation as his aide had coached him earlier. The name felt foreign on his tongue, despite having reviewed her service record that morning. 28 years old, Navy SEAL, multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. The details blurred together with countless other files he had processed over the years. The double doors at the back of the chamber opened with a soft whoosh, and Admiral Hayes looked up from his notes. What he saw made him pause mid-thought. A small Asian woman in dress blues walked through the entrance, her posture perfectly straight, medals gleaming on her chest. She moved with the quiet confidence he had seen in only the most elite operators, but something about her seemed almost ordinary at first glance. Behind her filed in what appeared to be half the Special Operations community. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force Special Tactics personnel filled the seats. Admiral Hayes had expected a decent turnout for a Medal of Honor ceremony, but this was unprecedented. The room buzzed with an energy he had rarely witnessed, even during the most significant military events. As Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen took her place at the front of the room, Admiral Hayes noticed something remarkable happening around him. Every SEAL in the chamber sat a little straighter. Hardened warriors who had faced down terrorists in the world's most dangerous places watched her with expressions that bordered on reverence. These were men who rarely showed emotion, yet their faces told a story of deep respect and something else entirely. Master Chief Jake Morrison, a legend in SEAL Team 6 with over 20 years of service, leaned forward in his seat. His weathered face, scarred from countless missions, softened as he watched Sarah adjust her uniform with the same precision he had seen her use while preparing explosives under enemy fire. Morrison remembered the first time he had met her during Hell Week at Bud S training. She had been the only woman in a class of 120 candidates, and most of the instructors had given her 2 days before she quit. They had been wrong. Captain Mike Rodriguez, sitting 3 rows back, unconsciously touched the scar on his left shoulder. He owed his life to the woman standing at attention in front of them all. During a hostage rescue mission in Syria, when everything had gone sideways and they were pinned down by enemy fire, Sarah had single-handedly cleared a path to safety. She had moved through the chaos like a force of nature, methodically neutralizing threats with a calm efficiency that had left even the most experienced operators speechless. Admiral Hayes cleared his throat and began reading from the official citation, unaware of the memories flooding through the minds of the Special Operations personnel around him. His voice echoed in the chamber as he recounted the mission that had earned Sarah the nation's highest military honor, but the sterile language of the official report could not capture the true magnitude of what she had accomplished. The mission had taken place in Afghanistan's Helmand province, where intelligence had located a high-value target responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces. Sarah had been part of a 12-man SEAL team tasked with capturing the terrorist leader alive. What should have been a routine operation had quickly turned into a nightmare when their insertion helicopter was shot down 3 miles from the target compound. Senior Chief Tommy Williams, now sitting in the front row, remembered watching Sarah emerge from the burning wreckage of their helicopter. While others treated the wounded, she had immediately begun assessing their tactical situation. With their primary extraction route compromised and enemy forces closing in, most operators would have called for immediate evacuation. Sarah had seen an opportunity. "We can still complete the mission," she had told the team leader through the radio static. Her voice had been steady, determined, despite the chaos surrounding them. The team leader, knowing her capabilities, had made the decision to trust her judgment. It was a decision that would save countless lives and deal a devastating blow to terrorist operations in the region. As Admiral Hayes continued reading the citation, describing how Sarah had infiltrated the heavily fortified compound alone while her teammates provided overwatch, the SEALs in the audience remembered the tense hours of waiting. They had watched through night vision scopes as she moved like a shadow through the compound, neutralizing guards with silent precision while making her way toward the target. Lieutenant Chris Anderson, one of the youngest SEALs present, had been Sarah's spotter during that mission. He remembered the moment when everything went wrong inside the compound. An explosion had rocked the building, and for several terrifying minutes they had lost all contact with Sarah. The team had prepared to storm the compound, certain that their teammate had been killed or captured. Then Sarah's voice had crackled through their headsets, calm and professional as always. "Package secured. Multiple hostile casualties. Requesting immediate extraction at Rally Point 2. She had emerged from the compound 15 minutes later, dragging an unconscious high-value target behind her and carrying intelligence materials that would lead to the disruption of an entire terrorist network. But the citation Admiral Hayes was reading did not mention what happened next, and it was this part of the story that had cemented Sarah's legend among the special operations community. As the team prepared to move toward their extraction point, they had been ambushed by a force of over 50 Taliban fighters who had surrounded their position. Pinned down in a drainage ditch with limited ammunition and no cover, the team had faced annihilation. Their radio operator had been killed in the initial volley, cutting off their communication with air support. The Taliban fighters, emboldened by their numerical advantage, had begun closing in from multiple directions. Without hesitation, Sarah had grabbed the team's remaining explosives and sprint toward the enemy positions. Master Chief Morrison had tried to stop her, knowing it was essentially a suicide mission, but she had already disappeared into the darkness. For the next 20 minutes, explosions had erupted throughout the Taliban positions as Sarah systematically destroyed their strong points. When the smoke cleared and coalition helicopters finally arrived for extraction, they found Sarah unconscious, but alive, surrounded by the bodies of 18 enemy fighters. She had sustained multiple gunshot wounds and shrapnel injuries, but had managed to break the enemy assault and save her entire team. The high-value target had survived and provided intelligence that prevented dozens of planned attacks on coalition forces. Admiral Hayes finished reading the official citation and looked up at Sarah Chen, still struggling to reconcile the modest young woman before him with the incredible acts of heroism described in the report. He had read many Medal of Honor citations throughout his career, but few had detailed such sustained courage under impossible odds. As he prepared to present the medal, Admiral Hayes noticed the absolute silence in the chamber. These were warriors who had seen combat in every corner of the globe, yet they watched the ceremony with an intensity that spoke to something deeper than mere professional respect. In their eyes, he saw the recognition that they were witnessing history being made. Sarah stood perfectly still as Admiral Hayes approached with the Medal of Honor, its blue ribbon and gold star catching the light. Her face remained impassive, showing none of the emotion that coursed through the audience around her. This was the same composure she had displayed during the mission that had brought her to this moment, the same calm focus that had allowed her to accomplish the impossible. The weight of the medal as Admiral Hayes placed it around her neck seemed insignificant compared to the burden of leadership and sacrifice it represented. As the audience rose in thunderous applause, Sarah's thoughts drifted back to the teammates who had not returned from other missions, the ones whose heroism would never be recognized because they had not lived to receive it. Standing there in the Pentagon briefing room, surrounded by the finest warriors America had ever produced, Sarah Chen had become something more than just another Medal of Honor recipient. She had become a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. when training met instinct, and when one person's willingness to sacrifice everything made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The ceremony concluded with military precision, but as the attendees began to file out of the chamber, it became clear that this moment would be remembered long after the official records were filed away. The SEALs who had served with Sarah approached her not with the casual camaraderie typical of military gatherings, but with the profound respect reserved for someone who had proven herself in the ultimate test of combat leadership. Admiral Hayes watched these interactions with growing understanding. While he might forget names and faces from the countless files that crossed his desk, these operators would never forget Sarah Chen. Her name was written not just in official records, but in the living memory of the special operations community that had witnessed her transformation from an unlikely candidate into a legendary warrior. 3 years before that Pentagon ceremony, Sarah Chen had been just another candidate reporting for basic underwater demolition TARC SEAL training at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she looked nothing like the imposing figures typically associated with America's most elite fighting force. The other candidates towered over her, their muscled frames casting shadows as they gathered for their first formation. Instructor Senior Chief Marcus Thompson had seen thousands of hopeful candidates pass through Bud-S training over his 15-year career. Most arrived with inflated egos and unrealistic expectations about what it meant to become a Navy SEAL. As he looked at Class 285 that first morning, his eyes inevitably settled on the small Asian woman standing perfectly straight in the back row. "Great," he muttered to his fellow instructor, Petty Officer First Class Davis. Another social experiment. The Navy had recently opened SEAL training to women, and Thompson had watched several highly motivated female candidates wash out during previous classes. Not because they lacked courage or determination, but because the physical demands of Bud-S training had been designed to break even the strongest men. Sarah had heard similar sentiments throughout her naval career. After graduating from MIT with degrees in electrical engineering and computer science, she could have taken any number of high-paying civilian jobs. Instead, she had chosen to enlist in the Navy, driven by a desire to serve that her family had never quite understood. Her parents, both successful doctors who had immigrated from Taiwan, had been horrified when she announced her intention to pursue special operations training. The first week of Bud's training, known as Indoctrination Week, was designed to introduce candidates to the physical and mental challenges that lay ahead. For most candidates, it was a wake-up call. For Sarah, it was validation that she had made the right choice. While other candidates struggled with the intense physical training and sleep deprivation, she adapted quickly to the demanding routine. Her background in competitive swimming and martial arts had prepared her body for the rigorous training, but it was her mental approach that truly set her apart. Where other candidates fought against the pain and exhaustion, Sarah embraced it as a necessary component of transformation. She understood that Bud's training was not just about building physical strength, but about forging the mental resilience required for special operations. The real test came during Hell Week, 6 days of continuous training with minimal sleep and food. This was where the majority of candidates would quit, unable to endure the relentless physical and psychological pressure. As the week began, Class 285 had already lost 30 candidates, and the instructors expected to lose at least half of the remaining candidates during the next 6 days. Sarah's first major challenge came during the second night of Hell Week, during what the instructors called surf torture. Candidates were required to link arms and sit in the frigid Pacific Ocean surf, while instructors shouted instructions and questioned their motivation for becoming SEALs. The water temperature was 58 degrees, and hypothermia was a constant threat. As the hours passed, candidates began ringing the bell that would end their SEAL training. The sound echoed across the beach every few minutes as another hopeful warrior gave up on his dream. Sarah sat motionless in the surf, her body shaking uncontrollably from the cold, but her mind focused on a technique she had learned from her martial arts training. Master Chief Morrison, who was observing the exercise, noticed Sarah's breathing pattern. While other candidates gasped and shivered, she maintained steady, controlled breaths that helped her body manage the extreme cold. Her eyes remained open and alert, scanning the horizon as if she were on an actual mission rather than enduring training torture. "Look at Chen," Morrison whispered to another instructor. "She's not fighting it. She's working with it." It was a subtle but crucial difference that separated elite operators from ordinary soldiers. Sarah had instinctively understood that resistance to discomfort only amplified suffering, while acceptance and adaptation allowed the mind to function despite physical distress. The third day of Hell Week brought the around-the-world paddling exercise, where boat crews raced their heavy inflatable boats through the surf and around a series of buoys. Sarah's boat crew had struggled during previous exercises because they lacked the raw muscle mass of competing teams. Their coxswain, a former college football player named Rodriguez, had grown increasingly frustrated with their poor performance. "We're never going to win anything with Chen dragging us down," Rodriguez complained during a brief rest period. His comment carried across the beach, and several other candidates nodded in agreement. Sarah heard the criticism but said nothing, focusing instead on adjusting her paddling technique to maximize efficiency rather than power. When the race began, Sarah's crew fell behind immediately as the stronger teams powered through the surf. But as the exercise continued, something remarkable happened. While other crews began to tire from their aggressive pace, Sarah's team maintained steady progress. Her technical paddling skills and strategic thinking helped them navigate the course more efficiently, and they began gaining ground on the leaders. During the final leg of the race, two of the leading crews collided while competing for position, creating chaos in the surf zone. Sarah immediately took charge of her crew's navigation, calling out precise steering commands that allowed them to avoid the collision and slip into second place. Her crew's late surge had been noticed by every instructor on the beach. "That's leadership," Senior Chief Thompson observed to his colleagues. "She didn't try to outmuscle anyone. She outthought them." It was a lesson that would serve Sarah well throughout her career, but it was also the moment when her fellow candidates began to see her differently. The fourth night of Hell Week brought the dreaded log PT exercise, where teams of 8 candidates carried massive logs through various physical challenges. Sarah's team had drawn one of the heaviest logs, and the physical disparity between her and her teammates was most apparent during these exercises. While her teammates could shoulder significant portions of the log's weight, Sarah struggled to maintain her grip during the longer carries. As her team fell behind other groups, frustration mounted among her teammates. Several began making pointed comments about dead weight and team liability. The psychological pressure was as intense as the physical demands, and Sarah knew that losing her teammates' confidence could be more destructive than any physical challenge the instructors could devise. During a brief rest period, Sarah approached her team leader, a former Marine named Jackson, who had been one of her harshest critics. "I know I'm not as strong as you guys," she said quietly, "but I can do other things. Let me prove it." Jackson looked at her skeptically but nodded agreement. When the next challenge began, Sarah demonstrated what she meant. The exercise required teams to carry their logs through a series of obstacles while maintaining formation. While her teammates focused on brute force, Sarah studied the obstacles and began calling out tactical solutions. She identified the optimal approach angles, spotted potential hazards, and coordinated her team's movements with military precision. Her strategic thinking transformed her team's performance. They began completing obstacles faster than stronger teams who relied solely on physical power. Sarah's ability to visualize spatial relationships and calculate efficient movement patterns, skills developed through her engineering background, gave her team a significant tactical advantage. By the end of the exercise, her teammates' attitude toward her had completely changed. Jackson, who had questioned her value to the team just hours earlier, pulled her aside during their brief rest period. "I was wrong about you, Chen," he said simply. "You don't just carry your share of the weight. You make the whole team stronger." The final test of Hell Week came during the Steel Pier evolution, where exhausted candidates were required to perform complex physical tasks while suffering from extreme sleep deprivation and hypothermia. Many candidates who had survived the previous challenges would finally break during this exercise, their minds no longer able to process instructions or coordinate their movements. Sarah had been awake for over 90 hours when she entered the Steel Pier challenge. Her body was running purely on adrenaline and determination, but her mind remained surprisingly clear. As other candidates stumbled through the exercises like zombies, Sarah maintained the same methodical approach that had characterized her performance throughout Hell Week. The exercise required candidates to crawl under and over a series of steel obstacles while carrying heavy weights. The metal surfaces were slick with seawater, and the candidates' movements were clumsy from exhaustion. Several candidates suffered serious injuries when they lost their grip and fell onto the unforgiving steel structures. Sarah approached each obstacle with the same careful analysis she brought to engineering problems. She identified the safest hand and foot positions, calculated the most efficient movement patterns, and executed each task with minimal wasted energy. While other candidates repeatedly attempted and failed the same obstacles, Sarah moved through the course with steady progress. Her performance caught the attention of Captain Williams, the commanding officer of the BADS training program, who had arrived to observe the final Hell Week evolutions. Williams had overseen thousands of candidates during his career, and he recognized something special in Sarah's approach to the challenges. "She's not just surviving the training," Williams commented to Senior Chief Thompson. "She's mastering it. Look at how she moves compared to the others." Thompson nodded in agreement, having reached the same conclusion over the past week of observing Sarah's performance. When Hell Week finally ended after 6 days of continuous training, only 43 candidates remained from the original class of 120. Sarah was not just among the survivors. She had emerged as one of the class leaders. Her teammates, who had initially doubted her capabilities, now sought her advice on tactical problems and looked to her for guidance during challenging evolutions. The remaining phases of BADS training would test different aspects of the candidates' abilities. The diving phase would challenge their underwater skills and their ability to work in the hostile environment beneath the surface. The land warfare phase would develop their tactical shooting skills and small unit tactics. But Hell Week had been the crucible that forged the mental toughness required for special operations. For Sarah, Hell Week had been a revelation. She had discovered that her greatest strength was not physical power, but the ability to maintain mental clarity under extreme stress. This skill would prove invaluable during actual combat operations, where the ability to think clearly while under fire often meant the difference between life and death. As the surviving candidates prepared for the next phase of training, Sarah reflected on the transformation that had taken place within herself and her relationships with her teammates. She had entered BADS training as an outsider, questioned and doubted by instructors and fellow candidates alike. She had emerged as a proven warrior, respected by peers and instructors who had initially dismissed her potential. The journey from MIT graduate to Navy SEAL candidate had been challenging enough, but the journey from SEAL candidate to combat-ready operator would prove even more demanding. The advanced training that lay ahead would test not just her physical and mental abilities, but her capacity for leadership under the ultimate pressure of live combat operations. The morning briefing at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan's Khost province began like countless others during Sarah's 18-month deployment with SEAL Team 4. Intelligence had identified a time-sensitive target in the mountains near the Pakistani border, and Sarah's team had been selected for what appeared to be a routine capture operation. The target was Malik Hassan, a high-level Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. Lieutenant Commander Jake Martinez, the team leader, spread aerial photographs across the briefing table as Sarah and her 11 teammates gathered around. The compound was typical of high-value target locations: mud brick walls, multiple buildings, and numerous escape routes through the surrounding mountain terrain. What made this mission different was the intelligence indicating that Hassan was planning a major attack on a coalition convoy, scheduled to pass through the area within 48 hours. "Primary objective is capture," Martinez emphasized, pointing to the largest building in the compound. "Hassan has intelligence on future attack plans that could save a lot of American lives. Secondary objective is any intelligence materials we can recover from the site." Sarah studied the photographs intently, already visualizing potential approach routes and identifying possible complications. The mission planning session extended into the afternoon as the team analyzed every aspect of the operation. Sarah's role would be overwatch and communications, positioned on a ridge approximately 800 meters from the target compound. Her engineering background had made her the team's expert on electronic surveillance and communications equipment, skills that proved invaluable during complex operations. As evening approached, the team conducted final equipment checks and rehearsed their insertion procedures. The plan called for helicopter insertion at a landing zone 5 kilometers from the target, followed by a foot movement through mountainous terrain to reach their positions before dawn. Weather conditions were perfect, with clear skies and no moon to complicate their movement. The helicopter flight to the insertion point passed without incident, but as soon as Sarah's team began their movement toward the target, they encountered their first complication. Intelligence reports had failed to identify a Taliban patrol base located directly along their planned route. The team was forced to make a significant detour through more difficult terrain, adding precious time to their approach march. Master Chief Morrison, serving as the team's senior enlisted advisor, called a halt during the detour to reassess their timeline. "We're running 90 minutes behind schedule," he whispered into his radio. "Dawn's coming fast, and we need to be in position before the compound wakes up." Sarah checked her GPS coordinates and studied her map, quickly calculating an alternative route that would save time but increase their exposure to observation. "I've got a faster route," she reported to Martinez, "but it means crossing open ground for about 400 meters. We'll be exposed if anyone's watching." Martinez studied the terrain features on his map, weighing the risks of exposure against the necessity of reaching their positions before daylight. After a brief consultation with Morrison, he made the decision to trust Sarah's navigation skills. Sarah led the team along a narrow goat trail that wound through a series of rocky outcroppings, using her night vision equipment to identify safe passage through the treacherous terrain. Her careful route selection allowed them to maintain their stealth while making up lost time. And they reached their final positions just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon. From her overwatch position, Sarah had an excellent view of the target compound through her high-powered spotting scope. She could see guards moving between buildings, cooking fires being lit in the courtyard, and the routine activities that indicated the compound was occupied. Her communications equipment allowed her to maintain contact with the assault team as they moved into position around the compound perimeter. "I count 12 military-aged males in the compound," Sarah reported quietly into her headset. "2 guards on the north wall, 3 more near the main building. I don't see our target yet, but there's definitely activity in the primary structure." Martinez acknowledged her report and began coordinating the final positioning of his assault elements. The assault began at exactly 0630 hours, time to catch the compound's occupants during their morning routine when alertness would be at its lowest. Sarah watched through her scope as Martinez's team breached the compound walls simultaneously from two directions, moving with the practiced efficiency of warriors who had conducted hundreds of similar operations. Initially, everything proceeded according to plan. The guards were neutralized quickly and quietly, allowing the assault team to reach the main building without triggering a general alarm. Sarah maintained constant surveillance of the surrounding area, watching for enemy reinforcements or attempts to escape the compound. Her position allowed her to provide crucial tactical information to the assault team as they cleared each building. Then, disaster struck in the form of an intelligence failure that would transform a routine operation into a desperate fight for survival. As Martinez's team breached the main building where Hassan was supposed to be located, they discovered that the compound was actually a meeting place for multiple Taliban commanders. Instead of capturing a single high-value target, they had stumbled into a gathering of over 20 enemy fighters, all armed and prepared for battle. The sound of gunfire erupted from the compound as Sarah watched her teammates become engaged in close-quarters combat with a force nearly twice their size. Radio communications became chaotic as team members called for support while simultaneously trying to fight their way through the compound. Sarah realized immediately that the mission had gone catastrophically wrong and that her teammates were in mortal danger. "Contact! Contact!" Martinez's voice crackled through Sarah's headset. "Multiple enemy personnel in the compound. We need immediate fire support and extraction." Sarah began calling for helicopter support while simultaneously providing tactical guidance to her teammates, but she knew that help was at least 20 minutes away. In a firefight at close quarters, 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. As the battle intensified, Sarah watched through her scope as her teammates were forced to take defensive positions within the compound. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and running low on ammunition. Several team members had been wounded, and their movement was becoming increasingly restricted as enemy fire pinned them down in a small courtyard. Without hesitation, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Abandoning her overwatch position, she gathered her equipment and began moving toward the compound. Her official orders were to maintain communications and provide surveillance, but her teammates were dying, and standing orders meant nothing in the face of that reality. The 800-meter movement from her position to the compound became a tactical masterpiece of stealth and speed. Sarah used every piece of cover available, moving through irrigation ditches and behind rock formations to avoid detection. Her small size, which had once been seen as a disadvantage, now allowed her to move through terrain that would have been impossible for larger operators. As she approached the compound, Sarah could hear the intensity of the firefight increasing. Enemy fighters had taken positions on rooftops and behind walls, creating a deadly crossfire that prevented her teammates from maneuvering effectively. She realized that breaking the enemy's defensive positions would require someone to attack from an unexpected direction, and her position outside the compound gave her that opportunity. Sarah's first target was an enemy machine gun position that was preventing her teammates from moving to better cover. Using her sniper rifle, she eliminated the machine gunner with a single shot from a position the enemy never expected. The sudden loss of their primary fire support weapon created confusion among the Taliban fighters and allowed Martinez's team to reposition. But killing one enemy fighter was not enough to change the tactical situation significantly. The Taliban still held numerical superiority and advantageous positions throughout the compound. Sarah knew that her teammates needed more than sniper support. They needed someone to assault the enemy positions from behind and create the chaos necessary for escape. Moving around the compound perimeter, Sarah identified a section of wall that was unguarded due to its proximity to the main fighting. Using explosives from her equipment pack, she created a breach in the wall large enough to allow entry. The explosion drew enemy attention away from her teammates' positions and created the diversion Martinez needed to reorganize his defense. Sarah's entry into the compound marked the beginning of the most intense combat action of her military career. Armed with her rifle and the remaining explosives, she began a systematic attack on enemy positions from directions they had not anticipated. Her small stature and speed allowed her to move through the compound like a ghost, appearing long enough to eliminate targets before disappearing into shadows and building interiors. The Taliban fighters, who had moments earlier been confident of victory against the trapped American force, suddenly found themselves under attack from an unknown number of enemies. Sarah's movement created the impression of a much larger relief force, causing confusion and fear among fighters who had thought they controlled the battlefield. As Sarah continued her assault on enemy positions, she maintained radio contact with Martinez, coordinating their actions to maximize the impact of their combined fire. Her movement through the compound allowed her to eliminate enemy fighters who had been safely positioned behind cover, while her teammates engaged targets that remained visible from their defensive positions. The turning point in the battle came when Sarah reached the compound's main building, where the senior Taliban commanders had been coordinating the defense. Rather than attempting to clear the building room by room, Sarah used her remaining explosives to collapse a section of the structure, eliminating multiple enemy fighters simultaneously and destroying their command structure. With their leadership eliminated and under attack from multiple directions, the remaining Taliban fighters began to retreat from the compound. Sarah and her teammates pursued them through the surrounding terrain, eliminating several more enemy fighters before the survivors disappeared into the mountains. The compound that had moments earlier been a death trap for American forces was now under their complete control. As helicopter support finally arrived to extract the team, Sarah helped load her wounded teammates aboard the aircraft while simultaneously securing intelligence materials recovered from the compound. The documents and electronic devices they captured would provide crucial information about Taliban operations throughout the region, potentially saving hundreds of coalition lives. The aftermath of the mission revealed the true scope of what Sarah had accomplished. Post-action analysis determined that she had personally eliminated 18 enemy fighters during her assault on the compound, using a combination of precision rifle fire and explosives to break the enemy's defensive positions. Her actions had not only saved her teammates' lives, but had also eliminated multiple high-value targets whose deaths would significantly impact Taliban operations. When the team returned to base, word of Sarah's heroic actions spread quickly through the special operations community. Officers and enlisted personnel who had served multiple combat deployments recognized that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a display of courage and tactical skill that would become legendary among those who understood the true nature of combat. Master Chief Morrison, who had mentored Sarah since her early days in the SEAL teams, struggled to find words to describe what he had witnessed. "In 30 years of military service," he told anyone who would listen, "I've never seen anything like what Sarah Chen did in that compound. She didn't just save our lives, she turned a disaster into a victory." The mission that had begun as a routine capture operation had become the defining moment of Sarah's military career. Her actions had demonstrated not just personal courage, but the tactical brilliance and leadership ability that would eventually lead to her promotion and recognition as one of America's most effective special operations warriors. Standing in that Pentagon briefing room years later, Admiral Hayes might not have remembered Sarah's name, but every SEAL who had witnessed her transformation from an unlikely candidate into a legendary operator would never forget Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. Her name had become synonymous with the finest traditions of military service, courage under fire, and the warrior spirit that defined America's Special Operations Forces.